Finally, it's time to add some materials, but before we do that, let's quickly set up some camera here. And as always, I will be using the ISOCAM plugin to quickly set up the camera rotation. We have all the presets there, so we don't have to waste any time on that. So I'll press N right now and locate my PR ISOCAM add-on. And as always, you can find a link in the description. You can download it and load up in your add-ons if you haven't already in previous episodes. And let's now add the game ISOCAM, which is a little bit more like a shallow angle. And we don't really need isometric camera here, because for this one I want to do a perspective camera, but this add-on kind of just helps me to place the camera centered on our scene with the correct rotations and everything. So yeah, I just sometimes use it as a tool to place the camera, even though I want perspective cam. So right now let's just switch to the camera settings and switch to perspective camera, and we can now press G and Z twice to move it a little bit closer. And I want to change the ratio, so let's go to the output settings and set this to 4:3 ratio, so something like 1600 to 1200. And let's press G then Z twice again to move camera on its local Z axis. And additionally, you can just press G then Z to move it up and place it a little bit better. So I'm looking for something like this here. And if you don't have your cursor in the middle of the scene, let's hit Shift S and set cursor to world origin. And now we'll press Shift A and add the plane. I want to add a background to the scene, so we are really finished with all of the models here. And let's press S and scale it up to cover our whole scene. Just like this. Okay, and I want to call this background, so let's switch to the object settings and let's call this background or BG. And now let's hit 1 on a numpad. And let's move it down, so our curves kind of sit on the background there. So let's press G then Z and move it down like this, and we can hold Shift for some smaller adjustments. Okay, now let's hit 0 on the numpad to go back to the camera, and this will be our final composition. And it's finally time to add those materials. So first of all, let's go to the material tab, and again I mixed a lot of colors here, so I've prepared the palette for you. So we can load it up right now. Let's just go here to the corner until the crosshair appears. Let's click and drag to drag up the new window, and let's switch this to image editor. And now let's click open and just locate your palette JPEG file that you can download here in the description as well. And it should appear here like this. And you know, we can just sample colors from here so that you have as close a result as possible to the one I'm showing you right here. And since we have the background selected, let's start with that one. So I will just click new material. Let's call this BG, and let's sample the color with the eyedropper tool here, and let's sample from the BG color. And of course, to actually see the materials changing colors, we need to be in the material preview. So let's hold Z and go to the material preview. And right now we can see our background material. And there's one other thing I want to do here. To scroll down and adjust the roughness a little bit. I want to add a little bit of the roughness. Let's set this to 0.7. I don't want that much of a glossy reflection on the background here, so that's why I'm adding a little bit of roughness there. And now we can move on and create the other materials. So let's select the tower here and let's create a wall material. So click new and let's call this wall, and we can just click the color and sample it from the wall here like this. And we can leave the roughness as 0.5 here. And now we can move on to the rock. So let's select any rock you want, click a new material, create a rock material, and you kind of get my point. This is nothing new here. So basically we just need to assign all of these colors here and some roughness values. And for the rock, I want to go for 0.7 as well, so it's not that glossy. If you would be creating like a rainy scene or something, you might go lower on the roughness to kind of simulate the wetness of the rocks or something like that. So really here as well, it's up to you what you want to achieve with your illustration. And now let's select one of these shingles here. Let's create a roof material. So I will call this roof. And let's just pick the red color there. So use eyedropper and pick a red color from the palette. And I want this a little bit more glossy, so it's kind of like a more smooth weathered material. And let's set this to 0.25. so then the reflection on those sculpted details pop up a little bit better. And now for the roof structure, we want some gold metallic material. So let's select the object, let's create a new material, let's call this gold. And let's pick the color here. And here additionally, we need to set the metallic value all the way to the 1. And let's set the roughness to something like 0.45. So it's kind of a brushed metal or something like that. And let's go back one step and select one of these shingles again. I don't really want this red color for the shingles, so sorry for the mistake. Let's click it and let's select the roof color here. I messed up a little bit there, sorry. The red color is meant for the flag here. So, and I just realized it once we got to the flag. So let's select the flag and create a red material. And now let's pick the red color here. And here I want to go all the way to the 1 with the roughness, because it's kind of a, it should be a cloth or something. And now let's select one of these wooden logs and let's create a wood material here. Well, let's pick the color. And let's set the roughness to 0.7. And one last material here, I want to set the grass material for our ground object. Don't get confused if your particles look like selected. We are now setting the material only for the ground object. So let's create new and let's call this grass. And let's pick the color from the palette like this and set the roughness all the way to 1. If the particles disappear like this, don't worry, just scrub through the timeline a little bit and they should appear like this. And basically that's it for the materials. This is a very simple scene when it comes to materials. It will all come down to lighting. So right now let's just distribute some of these materials around the scene, around the rest of the objects that will use the same materials. So here I want to use the wall material and on the curbs as well. Now let's use the wood material on the tree here. And actually there is one more. We need to create material for the leaves. So let's create a new material. Let's call these leaves. And let's pick this cyan green color from the palette and let's set the roughness to 1. Okay, I think we need to set the gold here and the wood material there. That should be the last of it. And now the only object that doesn't have material is the actual grass blades. And I left it as the last one because I want to create a little bit of a custom shader here. I want some gradient there because the idea is that the grass blades will have the color of the grass ground at the bottom and gradually change towards this more like a bluish green color that the leaves have. So to do that, we kind of need to select the single grass blade. So let's enable the collection for a second. We have them right here and select any of them, doesn't really matter. And let's create a new grass blade material. And we'll need a node editor for this, so let's just switch to the shading workspace where we have already the node editor available. And we'll probably need the palette as well here, but we don't have to load it again. It's already loaded in Blender, we just need to display it here. And the shading workspace offers one empty image editor right here. So just click this icon right here and you can see all these orb brushes images. So let's just write palette and it should pop up like this. So we have the green color available here as well. Now let's hit 7 on a numpad and zoom in on our grass blades and we can set up some material here. And to create the gradient, we'll just need some gradient procedural texture, and there's a node for that. So let's just hit Shift A in the node editor and let's go for texture and gradient texture. This node itself doesn't do much. You need to connect it to some converter like a color ramp or something. But first I want to map it on our grass blades so we are sure that the gradient have a right direction. So make sure only this node is selected. You can see this one appears in orange as well. So let's click the gradient texture so the selection here disappears. Make sure you have the Node Wrangler add-on active. If you don't, just go into the preferences and activate it. You can watch the introductory chapters in the beginning of the course on how all of this should be set up. So now I will hit Ctrl T. That's the Node Wrangler shortcut for texture mapping. And additionally, I will hit Ctrl Shift and click the gradient texture, so we actually see the output connected to the viewer node, which is just a temporary emission node created for us by Node Wrangler. And now you can see that slight gradient on the blade, but we want to rotate this. So let's just go to the Z rotation and let's enter -90 degrees there. And that should place the black at the bottom and white at the top. And now we can connect this to the color ramp and map it to our grass colors. So I will press Shift A, go to converter and add the color ramp right here. And let's connect the color here to the factor. And now Ctrl Shift click the color ramp, so we see the preview of the color ramp result. And now let's just modify those colors. So click the black color here and use the eyedropper tool and pick the grass color. And on the other side, we want to do the same, but with the other colors. So let's click the eyedropper tool and pick the other one. And now to better see what this does, let's just select these other blades and let's assign that grass blade material to them as well. And I think I want more of that ground color, so let's just click and drag to move the gradient up a tiny bit like this. Okay, so I think this is it, but remember, Node Wrangler isn't like a native feature of Blender, so it's just a shortcut that do some automation for you, and what it did, it created emission node for you where you have the result of your node connected. So if you leave it like this, you know, actually this will render. So every time you use the Node Wrangler previews, don't forget to actually connect it to your shader. So right now let's just connect the color from the color ramp to the base color of the principled PSDF and Ctrl Shift click the principled shader. So we actually cancel that emission preview. And now we have material setup almost complete. Let's just modify the roughness settings all the way to 1. Don't forget to save your file, and let's go back to the layout and see what this does. And you can see how this gradient really creates that stylized grass look, almost a little bit of that Ghibli anime style grass that you might know from the Zelda games or something. So yeah, I really love this, how the grass kind of appears from that ground color. And right now we can just disable the grass collection, we don't need it anymore. And one last thing I want to do in this chapter is to prepare the particles in the scene. In the beginning, in the preview, you were able to see those like fairy lights around your scene, and that's what I want to create right now. And we'll need a particle system for that, and first of all we'll need some particle. So let's just create a very simple one. Let's press Shift A and create a cube. Now let's tab in, let's scale this down, maybe like this, it doesn't have to be too small. Now tab out, let's rotate the scene a little bit better, let's press G then Z and move it down. Sometimes I do shortcuts like this when I just don't want to move something into another collection and I don't want it visible, but still I want to be able to edit it and select. I kind of just move it under the background where I'm able to select it anytime, you know, and edit materials on it and stuff like that. Most of all, I do this just for like particle objects and stuff like that. So let's zoom in a little bit. And now let's just press Ctrl 1 to add the subdivision modifier, and we can go to the modifiers tab and press Ctrl A, hovering over the modifier to apply it, and now just right click and shade smooth. So we are interested in kind of a sphere model, but very low poly here. This will be very small dots. That's why I used only one level of subdivision here. And now let's just create a new material on this, and let's call this particle. And here, when we have a surface shader connected, just remove the principled shader and let's switch this to emission shader. And I want to pick that orange color from the light section here, and let's set this to 25 strength. And one last thing, I want to call this particle, so it's easier to select when we work with the particle system. Okay, that's it. And now we'll need to create some particle container, and I will use just the basic cube for that. So let's press Shift A and add the cube, and we can rename it right away. So let's call this particles. And sometimes I rename it here in the object settings if I don't want to locate it here in the outliner view. If you want to locate it in the outliner, again, you can just press period hovering here and it will locate your selected object, same as if it would in the viewport. And now let's tab into the edit mode. Let's press G, Z and 1 and enter. And that's because I know when I create a cube, by default, it's created in a size of 2 meters, and to move it in a way so it sits on the origin point at the bottom, you just move it 1 meter up. And now just tab out, press S and scale it up so it covers the scene, and maybe move it a tiny bit down like this. Now, to be able to use this as a particle container, of course, we'll need to hide it somehow. And in the particle settings, you can check the option to hide the emitter. But sometimes I had a problem with this, mostly in the EV and the material preview, where the object will be still visible, or it would mess up my shadows or something like that. So I kind of used to just add a transparent material to the object, so even if it's in the scene, it doesn't get rendered. But to be able to use it in the EV and material preview, and as you already know, I like to set my EV preview the way that it looks good, same as the cycles preview, so I have easier time switching between them when working on lighting and stuff like that. We can just go to the material settings, create a new material, and let's call this particles. And now we can scroll all the way down, and in the settings and in the blend mode, we want to click alpha clip, and in the shadow mode alpha clip as well, so it will basically cut out everything that has an alpha channel. And now let's just decrease the alpha material all the way to the 0, and you can see we have now invisible object in EV as well. And we don't need to switch it to like wireframe, because that way the particles inside would appear as wireframe too. So yeah, I probably like this approach the most. And now we can just switch to the particle settings, create a new particle system, and same as before, I want the frame start to 0, end to 0, so we have all the particles at once, and set the number to something really low, like 50. And I want to switch the source of the emission from faces to volume. So let's do that, so we have them nicely inside the cube. And now scroll down to the render tab and switch from halo to object, and let's pick the object from the list, and we can start writing particles, and it will suggest the particle object for us, so we can pick it up here. And now we can just play with the scale a little bit, so it really depends how large you want these dots to be. And let's set the scale randomness all the way to 1, so there is nice variation in between them. And now you can just scale the cube however you want, so you can decide to cover more of the scene or make it really local like this. I probably prefer something like this, maybe move it a little bit here. Okay, and let's set that scale to something maybe a little bit higher. And now for easier work with the scene, we can just expand the filters here on the outliner view and activate the selectable option and disable it on the particles object, so we are not able to select them in any way. Let's hit 0 on a numpad to go back to the camera view. So we created the camera with the ISOCAM add-on just to streamline the workflow, and right afterwards switched it to the perspective. We added some materials, created some gradient, and now created a particle system with those fairy lights here. And we are now ready to move on to the final step of the illustration.